Hey there, it's Liz from No Trace. I have become slightly obsessed with the super cute Jellycats stuffed animals. They're actually stuffed foods. They come in the shapes of cherries and watermelons and eggs. And I decided I really wanted to create a simplified version of a cute little Jellycats stuffy. And I started with a pear. This is a super easy project that you can teach to your kids, or if you teach kids to sew, you can teach them how to make this very simple stuffy. It is super adorable, and it's a great way to use up some really small scraps for the leaf and the stem. It's also a great way to upcycle old upholstery fabric and give it a new, adorable second life. So let me walk you through this pattern. It's a super fun and easy project. Let me show you the materials you'll need to make your own little pear stuffy. First, you'll need your main fabric. And this, like I mentioned, is a great project for upcycling old upholstery fabric, which is what I did with my first pair. But you could also use a soft fleecy fabric, a minky type fabric, anything that's soft and fuzzy. But really you could even use some scraps of quilting cotton. You're also going to need an embroidery needle and either embroidery floss or sashiko thread, plus little scraps for the leaf and stem, and glass beads for the eyes. These are about 6mm glass beads. You could go smaller, you could go larger. You could also use some little buttons if you have buttons lying around. You'll also need stuffing for your pear. I like to use organic cotton batting scraps for my stuffing instead of the polyester polyfill. This is also a great opportunity to use some of your tiny bits as stuffing as well. And of course, you will need a pattern piece. I have a free download on my website for this pear shape and this little leaf shape, but you could also just draw your own pattern piece. I would recommend folding it in half and cutting it on the fold so that your pattern piece is totally symmetrical if you make your own. Otherwise, there is a link below this video to snag the pattern piece that I drafted. The very first step is to trace your main pattern piece onto your fabric. If you're using a quilting cotton, you can skip this part, but if you're using fabric with a pile, which means it has raised yarn that you can feel, that gives it that soft, fuzzy feeling, you're going to want to decide how you want your pile to sit on your little pear. For mine, I like the pile to run in the down position, like I'm petting the belly of my pear down. So that's how I'm going to cut this fabric as well. But you could definitely cut your pile the opposite direction if you wanted. So right now my pile is going in the up direction here. So I am going to trace my pear so that the pile goes in the same direction from head to toe as my pear. So once you decide how you want your pile to go, just fold your fabric so that the right sides are together and the pile's going the same direction for both pieces. And then you're just going to trace your pattern piece onto your fabric. I like to use chalk, but you could also use a pencil. And of course, I'm trying to preserve as much fabric as I can. So I'm going to trace it as close to the edge as I can. Once it's traced, now I am just going to cut through both layers at the same time so I get two pear shapes that will line up really well with each other. I've got my two pieces cut out, so now the next step is to trace the smile onto one of the pieces, and it doesn't really matter where you put your smile. But I think it looks really cute when it's kind of near the center or even a little bit towards the bottom of your pear. So I'm just using chalk to trace a faint little smile. And now it's time for some really simple embroidery. This is very beginner friendly. So I have a length of thread here. I'm going to tie a knot at the end of the thread. Actually, I'm going to tie a double knot. And I'm using sashiko thread only because my local craft store did not have any black regular embroidery floss. So use what you have access to. Now I'm going to show you how to do a really simple back stitch. So my smile starts here and goes up to here. I am going to start my first stitch a little bit forward from this beginning point of my smile. So I like to keep my stitches kind of small. So I'm going to come forward maybe 2-3 millimeters from the beginning of my smile. I'm coming from the back to the front. I'm going to pull my thread all the way through, and then I'm going to go back to where my smile starts. So this is a simple back stitch, and pull the needle from the front to the back. So there is my first back stitch, and there's my knot on the back. Now I'm going to go forward about 1 stitch length on my smile, push my needle from the back to the front again, pull the thread all the way through, and then I'm going to go back to the back right where that first stitch is. I'm going to go in right next to that, and I'm just going to continue doing that until my smile is complete. So I'm just going to keep following my chalk mark and doing a back stitch all the way to this end. I finished embroidering the smile, and I have left my needle on my thread, and now I'm going to sew the eyes onto the fabric. And the way I like to sew them is so that they're kind of coming up off the fabric, but you could absolutely sew them more in a flat direction like they're shown here. So do what you prefer here. So you could mark where you want your eyes to go with chalk, or you can just eyeball it and bring the needle from the back to the front right where you want one of your eyes to go, and just get all that thread through. Then you're going to put the bead, or if you're using a button, put the button onto your needle, put it all the way down onto the fabric, and then you're going to put your needle back through right by where you came out. Doesn't have to be exactly where you came out, but close to there, and then pull your thread nice and tight till you get your eye up and down like that. And then I'm going to do that same stitch one more time. So this has 2 strong pieces of thread securing it in place, just like this. And then I will do the same with the second eye. Okay, both of the eyes are sewn on, and it already looks so super cute. I'm going to flip it to the back and just do a really simple knot. I'm going to put my needle under one of these stitches or lengths of thread so that I get a nice little loop. Then I'm going to go into the loop to create a knot, and I will do that one more time so that we have a secure double knot on the back of the little face. We can set these 2 pieces aside for a minute, and next we are going to create the leaf and the stem. You could definitely just do a stem or just a leaf. You could do 2 leaves and 1 stem. Do whatever you prefer. So you want a scrap of fabric for your leaf, and you actually want 2 layers. So fold your scrap over so that you have 2 layers of material. Place the leaf pattern piece, which you could also just eyeball this, and you want to have a little bit of seam allowance around the leaf. So make sure your scrap isn't too small, and you'll probably want a pencil to trace. I'm going to trace my leaf shape onto my fabric. You could also use a pen. You could use chalk for this. It's just that you want to be fairly precise because, well, if you're working with a tiny piece of fabric like I am here. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see that, but I have the leaf shape drawn on the scrap. And next I'm gonna take this to the machine and I'm gonna sew where I drew the pencil, but I'm not gonna sew the bottom flat side, and I'm just gonna sew through both layers. So let me show you. I'm gonna start at one of the bottom edges of the leaf, and I'm gonna make sure to do a back stitch here. And then I'm just gonna take my time and follow that pencil mark all the way around. I'm back near the bottom edge, and I'm gonna again do a back stitch here at the bottom, and remember to leave an opening there. Now that the leaf trace line is sewn, I'm gonna go ahead and cut these two pieces away from the rest of my fabric. It's just easier to work with your scraps, your tiny scraps, when they're a bit larger. So that's why I kind of kept it all together. Now I'm gonna trim away the extra fabric from the edge, but I wanna leave about a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. You don't wanna get super close to your stitches. And these tiny bits are gonna go into my pear. But before that, we have to turn this right side out, and a chopstick is super handy for this, or the eraser end of your pencil. So just kind of split those layers, start to get things turned, and then just kind of push your material out through the opening. And it shouldn't be too fussy, but it is probably one of the more fussy parts of this project. Here we go. Okay. And it's always a good idea to give it a little press with the iron. So I'm gonna do that as well. Now we're ready to construct the stem of the pear. And again, you can be very creative with this. Do it as tall, as short, as narrow, as wide as you want. I am going to use this fabric as the stem. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with my leaf pattern piece, but I'm just going to eyeball it. So I'm going to fold the fabric together. And remember, whatever height you want for your stem, you're going to lose about 1/2 inch of it to your seam. So you want to add that in when you fold your fabric right sides together. And then just trace more or less what you want your final stem to look like. Well, let's make it a little bit taller. So I'm making my stem about 1.5 inches tall. Once again, I am going to sew just on the pencil line here. I'm going to leave this open at the bottom so I can turn it right side out. Okay, I sewed the stem. So once again, I'm going to cut the larger piece of scrap away from the stem and then trim the seam allowance to about 1/4 inch or so. And I will save these tiny bits for stuffing as well. And then I'm going to turn my stem right side out just like I did before. Not sure where I put my chopstick, but pencil's working okay. Now that I have my stem and my leaf, I am going to position them onto the face side of the pear with the right side pointed down into the pear. And one thing to keep in mind, if you are placing either of these at an angle, so if you want your little leaf to come out at an angle like this one, you're going to pin it at the opposite direction. So if you just imagine we sew right here, when we turn our pear right side out, our leaf is going to angle off to the right, even though we pinned it towards the left, okay? So, and then you can decide if you want them overlapping a little bit, or if you want them totally separated or completely overlapping. So I am going to first put the leaf down and then put the stem behind on top of it. And then when I flip my pear around, the leaf will be a little bit in front of the stem. Okay, so I've got these in position, and you could pin them right here, or just go ahead and get your second layer of fabric, place it right sides together, and then just go ahead and pin all the way around. Or if you prefer, you could clip these in place. I'm gonna go ahead and pin these two pieces together and put a clip right here. And one thing to point out is you wanna make sure the raw edge of your leaf is all the way up with the raw edge of your pear. That way, when you go to sew, you'll make sure to catch the leaf and the stem in your seam. So I'm gonna go ahead and clip it because it's a little bit bulky here for a pin. And then the rest of my fabric, I'm just gonna join them with pins. Now it's ready to be sewn, but we are going to leave an opening at the bottom of about 2 inches so that we can turn our pear right side out. And I'm gonna sew all along this edge with about a 1/2 to a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, I've sewn all the way around, and it's a good idea to double check that you caught your stem and your leaf in your seam where you wanted to, not also on the side. So if you did accidentally sew your leaf into the side where you didn't want to, just seam rip and try again. And if you want to, you can trim down the seam allowance a bit, and you can add those bits to the stuffing as well. And then we are ready to turn it right side out through the opening and add the stuffing. I also made sure to back stitch at both sides of the opening to make this a little bit easier. And once again, I left my chopstick somewhere else, but it's a good idea to get inside the pear and push that seam out all the way around. It already looks so cute. I love it. All right, so I'm gonna add these little bits to my pear, and then I'm also gonna add the organic cotton batting. And if you have little bits of batting, you can tug on your batting and that will help it fluff up a little bit. And then just fill your pear as fluffy as you want it, but you do need to make sure not to overfill at the opening, because we're going to fold these edges in and hand sew the opening closed. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill this up with some stuffing, and then we will sew it closed. Once the pear is stuffed to your liking, however stuffed you wanna make it, we are gonna close up this opening with a simple ladder stitch. Normally you would choose a fabric that blends in. You'd choose a thread that blends in with your fabric. I am gonna be using a thread that you hopefully can see a little bit better on your screen. So I have a piece of thread that's doubled over, and I'm gonna tie the two ends together in a double or a triple knot. It depends on your fabric, how many knots you're gonna need. If your fabric is kind of loosely woven, more porous, a smaller knot will probably slip through. I think for mine, a triple knot should be large enough to stay in place. Okay, let me show you a simple ladder stitch, or hidden stitch, it's also called. So I have these raw edges folded over on both sides of the opening. I am gonna start by going under that folded over edge, right next to where the seam ends. and where the seam meets the opening and pull the thread through the folded edge. Then I'm going to take my needle and go directly across from this folded edge to this folded edge. And I am going to grab a pinch of the folded edge. I want to make sure my needle is not going all the way through to the other side of the fold. It's just staying in that fold. Grab a little pinch and then pull all the way through. And if you are sewing directly across, your stitch is going to be hidden. So now I am on the face side of the opening. I am going to go directly across to the other fold. Once again, grab a pinch, so put the needle under that fold and then back out to grab a little pinch and pull nice and tight. And once again, that stitch should be hidden, especially if you have a fluffy fabric like this guy. I'm going to go ahead and keep sewing back and forth across this folded edge. And I also have a blog post that has an illustration of the ladder stitch or hidden stitch. So if you learn well from drawings too, not just video, I'm going to link to that blog post. It's for how to fix a stuffed animal, but it shows you the ladder stitch with a little drawing that can be helpful for some people. So just click in the description box below this video to see that post if you want even more guidance on the invisible stitch. Once I have sewn all the way across the opening back to the other seam, I'm going to tie a knot, and I just wanted to show you how I do that. It's kind of hard to see with the fluffy fabric, but basically I want to go back into my hand stitches and find a stitch somewhere. Where is a stitch? Okay, so I'm going to go into that seam I just closed and find that little stitch. Oh, here's a stitch. Okay, so I'm finding a stitch. I'm going under that stitch to create a loop. And then I am putting my needle into the loop and then tightening the loop and then tightening the thread all the way to create a little knot. I'm going to do that one more time. So find that stitch, go under that stitch, create a loop, put the needle into the loop, pull nice and tight. Okay, then I am going to go into my seam and back out anywhere else on the pear with the needle to get the thread all the way inside the pear. And then if you use a matching thread, you shouldn't be able to see anything. I can see a tiny bit of red because I used red, but that's okay. Then I just pull tight on the thread, cut close to the pear, and then fluff it up. And my little pear is done. It's so cute. I love my new pear, and I think these two pairs are going to look super cute in my sewing studio. And if you are looking for more fun upcycling projects, I'd love for you to check out my membership. Just click the join button below this video to learn more.